Welcome. My name's Michael McLaren and my job is to try and MC tonight's event. And it's my privilege to welcome you all to the 2022 Wilks Oration to be presented by Mr. Stan Grant. But more of that later. Can I please just go through three small items of housekeeping? The first one is that should something happen, there are multiple exit points, fairly straightforward. Follow the running man, that'll be me, and we'll exit. We'll go to the car park, and we have a list of everyone who's here, so we'll make sure we don't leave anyone behind. The second one is I just want to mention, have you switched your mobile phones off? There's always someone, and it's usually me. So could I just ask that you either have it switched off or on vibrate? I know that there are some folk that need to have their phone on, and that's fair enough, but and I should also mention it's a $50 note fine if it does go off. It's probably fair to announce that up front. So welcome again to our 2022 Wilks Oration. We acknowledge that we're meeting on Kaurna country, and I'd like to ask Mr. Trevor O'Brien to give the welcome to country.
Maratachanga, Gana Mina, Nawangani, Manirapudni, Gana Yatana. Nai Berku Mankalankala, Tarandanya, Mianaku. Nai Chu Yungandala, Nai Chu Yakandala, Padli Abdu Waru. On behalf of the Kaurna people, I welcome you all to Kaurna country. I do this as an ambassador of the Adelaide Plains people. My brothers, my sisters, let's all walk together in harmony. Naitalia, thank you. Personally, I'd also like to acknowledge Warragee man, Stan Grant. He's been a personal favourite as a journalist to me, and something in common we got, we're both born in the same year, except he's a bit older than me by about a month, exactly a month. So I have to call him Yunga, older brother. Thank you. No problem.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I'd like to now take a moment to welcome some of our special guests. Now, I know that there's a case for saying that we're all special, so I'll cop it on the chin for that. But I'd like to firstly acknowledge the Wilkes family, Kathy Wilkes and Dr. Michael Wilkes and Kat, we let you in from Queensland, is that right? Yes. So, special welcome to the moderator of the Uniting Church in South Australia, Mr. Bronte Wilson, sitting about 3 rows back, and also to the immediate past president of the Uniting Church in Australia, Dr. Deirdre Palmer, and we'll be hearing from Deirdre shortly. Mr. Clyde Rigney of the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, Mayor Michael Hewitson from the City of Unley, and the Honourable David Pisoni, State Member for the seat of Unley. And we get lots of support, particularly from our local council, and we're most grateful, and it's wonderful to have you here tonight. Also, a special welcome to Tali Leondaris, who is the Uniting Church Covenanting Officer for the South Australian Synod. The Reverends David and Sarah Williamson and Pastor Nola Gibbons from Christchurch Uniting Church. And to everyone, a warm welcome to this Effective Living Centre event, and thank you for being here. It's worth mentioning other ELC events while I have the chance. Events like Seminary of the Third Age, Poets' Corner, the Environmental Action Group, and if you haven't already done so, I commend our website to you for some of the things that we do. And of course, welcome to our orator, Mr. Stan Grant, particularly given the events of the last 36 hours that are ongoing. And if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I'd be fairly certain that they'll be woven into tonight's oration. This is our 17th Wilkes Oration. There have been a couple of cancellations because of COVID and a couple of cancellations, for example, with Justice Michael Kirby because of last-minute commitments. So this is our 17th. Why do we do it? Why do we honour Graham Wilkes in this way? The Reverend Dr. Sean Gilbert has some answers.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, one and all. Really privileged to have been invited tonight to recall something of Graham Wilkes' legacy. And while all those years ago, some 20 years now, the Effective Living Centre decided to name this oration in his memory and his honour. Its stated goal at the time being to help further the quality of life and community health in SA, seeking to really contribute to the well-being of our state. And I have no doubt that that aim will be met this evening through Stan Grant's presence and eloquent wisdom. Graham died suddenly in mid-2001. Since 1998, he had been a founding enthusiast for the vision of ELC, serving on the management committee as its inaugural secretary and a general stirrer of the pot. I can hear some sense. Graham was an ex-Presbyterian Kiwi minister and a socially prominent psychologist in Adelaide. Graham saw the potential of a local uniting church community seeking to bridge, in its own modest yet significant ways, the secular-sacred divide. An unusual daring in an otherwise charged social climate of us and them, the true believer and the heretic, the welcomed and the scapegoated. Indeed, when I introduced the very first Wilkes Oration in 2002, from memory I think at the Town Hall, I'll stand corrected if that's not a right recollection. At that evening I described Graham's irrepressible character as being eclectic, accepting and infectiously hopeful. He loved life and people, in other words, and he desired a just fullness of life to be a present possibility and right for all citizens. So Graham was a conduit of human goodness on a broad scale. Yet coupled with that was that endearing quality was his reach of intellectual curiosity. For instance, theology wasn't his thing later in life, but that didn't stop him encouraging someone like me to find resonant points of meaning and social connection through doctoral research. I have a lot to be grateful for in terms of his mentoring. In sum, it was Graham's respectful belief in collective, contributing voices that lay at the heart of why we name this annual oration after him. For it meant hearing from thinkers and writers and orators from across the spectrum who were willing to speak lucidly and constructively with the well-being, the shalom, of the whole clearly in mind. Eminent educators, historians, social justice advocates, a retired High Court judge, poets and spiritual seers, and Lowicha O'Donoghue, who simply stands in a revered category of her own. I'm really pleased that the Wilkes Oration is continuing in its unique character and vein. May it long be a public voice of grounded reason, communal aspiration and substantive hope in an increasingly buffeted world. Thank you.
And tonight we're really lucky and privileged to have Vonda last with us. And I'd like to ask Vonda to come up.
wonderful to be here tonight on Kaurna Country. I'd like to sing a couple of songs, original songs. This first one is called Driving, and it's just a little story in a song about my childhood memories of growing up in the eastern goldfields of Western Australia and the lots of trips we used to do in the car with Mum and Dad. Bring me home when I am old, lay me down and bury me in the red, red ground, in wide open spaces, west of the ranges, where the old people roam, where the old people roam. I'm breathing in the scent of my childhood, remembering memories long gone. Dusty roads, wind in my hands, and we're driving to somewhere, who knows? Mum and Dad sit silently, we're sleeping through the night, and I'm dreaming again. I'm breathing in the scent of my childhood, remembering memories long gone. Dusty roads, wind in my hands, and we're driving to somewhere, who knows? Auntie Amy's at the door and I run to say hello. I saw her picture in a photograph from Dad. She doesn't look the same and I run back to the car, and it's funny the little things I remember. I'm breathing in the scent of my childhood, remembering memories long gone. Dusty roads, wind in my hands, and we're driving to somewhere, who knows? Mum and Dad sit silently, we're sleeping through the night, and I'm dreaming again. I'm breathing in the scent of my childhood, remembering memories long gone. Dusty roads, wind in my hands, and we're driving to somewhere, who knows? And we're driving to somewhere, who knows? And we're driving to somewhere, who knows? Thank you. And I'd like to sing a song called Home, which I sing in English and in my grandmother's tongue. Ngandadara. many nations come together. You can be proud of who you are. This is your land, this is your home. This is our land, this is our home. This is your land, this is your home. We all belong.
Vonda, that was really special, thank you. I mentioned when we started that I'd be asking Dr. Deirdre Palmer to undertake something a little more official, and I'd like to do that now, to introduce Stan Grant and tonight's oration topic, the politics of identity.
Thank you. As we gather, I acknowledge the Kaurna people, the sovereign first people of the land on which we gather. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and their emerging leaders, and honour their continuing culture amongst us from time immemorial. And thank you, Trevor, for your welcome to country. I also pay my respects to all First Peoples here today. It is a privilege and joy to have you here with us tonight, Stan. Stan Grant is a Wiradjuri, Kamilaroi, Dharawal and Irish man. He is an internationally renowned journalist who has worked for the ABC, the SBS, the Seven Network, Sky News Australia, and he has been the senior correspondent for CNN in Asia and the Middle East. Stan is the ABC's International Affairs Analyst and presents China Tonight for the ABC. He has won numerous awards for his work, including the Walkley Book Award for his best-selling book, Talking to My Country. And he has also won a Walkley Award for his coverage of Indigenous affairs. Stan is the author of a number of books, a number of which are available from Mostly Books tonight. It includes The Tears of Strangers, Talking to My Country, Australia Day, On Identity, and With the Falling of the Dusk, a chronicle of the world in crisis. He has featured in the documentary The Australian Dream, the story of Adam Goodes, which explores race, identity and belonging in Australia. He's also written in the quarterly essay about the Australian Dream. We've seen Stan in 1+1, exploring issues around identity, beginning with the key question he asks of well-known Australians, who are you? We may be asking that question of ourselves tonight. Who are you? Stan has offered us insightful commentary and analysis of the world around us, including a powerful article this morning that you may have read on Russia's Ukraine invasion, and the heading is, "It's not just about borders or power, for Putin, it's about identity." Stan inspires and challenges us. He has opened our eyes through his powerful storytelling and courageous coverage to the lives and events of people from around the world. Stan's insights on toxic identity in his book With the Falling of the Dusk and how it can play out in our world is particularly relevant and chilling in the shadow of what we are seeing unfolding in Ukraine as we sit here tonight. Stan has encouraged us to think on who we are in our personal identity and as a nation within the global community, and he is a prophetic voice for justice and human rights. Stan's reflections on identity are thought-provoking, calling us to examine the narratives that have shaped our national identity in Australia, including some recent excellent commentary on our religious identity and our personal understandings of who we are. Stan highlights the importance of us addressing the injustices, the historical narratives and ongoing racism and exclusion in Australia as part of, in his words, the quest to heal the soul of the nation. Stan, we thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to your presentation and your invitation to us to explore the politics of identity. Please welcome Mr. Stan Grant.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Deirdre. Much appreciated. Graham, thank you. Graham picked me up at the airport today, took me to the hotel and grabbed a bit of dinner on the way as well, so I've been incredibly well looked after. Just looking at this here tonight and seeing the Effective Living Centre, who I'd like to thank for giving me the honour of being here to deliver the Graham Wilks Oration. And those words, respect, compassion, inclusion, fairness, integrity and community, I could not have thought of more apt words for what I'm going to talk about tonight. Let me begin by paying my respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional owners of this land where we are meeting today, and to say what an honour it is to be here. To join in the fine tradition of the Wilks Oration. It's been a couple of years now, Graham. The last few years have felt like one very, very long year for all of us, I'm sure. But I was meant to be here last year, and I'm finally here, and I'm really honoured to be here and to join in this incredible tradition. And remember and respect Graham Wilks, a man of hope, compassion and wisdom, who believed resolutely, and we heard tonight, in that what connects us must be greater than what divides us. And how I wish that were the case, how I wish that there were more like Graham. Look around our world and it seems that we speak more powerfully to division and hatred. And we can't let those forces win in our world. Like Graham, I shared an abiding faith in God, and amidst the turmoil that threatens to engulf us, know that we can find that place of peace where God dwells in us all. What a world we live in. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, captured it best. He said, we live not just in a time of change, but a changing time. Let me repeat that, because we need to dwell on those words. We live not just in a time of change, but a changing time. The world that I was born into is not the world that I live in. The world that I will pass to my children will not be the world of today. In my lifetime, nations have risen and fallen. The map of the world has changed. I was born into Cold War in 1963. I saw the Berlin Wall fall. As a reporter, I have covered wars across many lands. And now we talk of Cold War Mark II and fear the global war to come. Russia, as I speak, is bombarding Ukraine. There are warnings that Europe could descend into the most catastrophic conflict since the end of World War II. China eyes Taiwan and threatens to invade. And so much of our world is already ablaze in violence and war. That is the backdrop to my speech tonight. I want to take you on a journey into the world that I have seen up close in all its glory, and far too often in all its terror. And I want to begin with a question. It is the most dangerous question I can ask you. Who are you? The most dangerous question. I have spent most of my life pondering this question. My search for the answer has taken me all around the world. Wherever I have been, up to 80 countries and every continent, I have found the same thing. The answer to that question, who are you, can determine whether one lives or whether one dies. I have stood in bombed-out marketplaces where the blood is so thick on the ground that it stuck to the soles of my shoes. The smell was so pungent I could taste it in the back of my throat. I've seen mothers picking the charred flesh from shrapnel holes in the walls to put into plastic bags because it is all they had left of their children to bury. Who are you? What a lethal question. From Northern Ireland to Rwanda to the Balkans, Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, the United States, France, New Zealand, the Korean Peninsula, China, Russia. I could go on and on and on. Australia too. That question, who are you, has at various times, and particularly for my people, First Nations people of Australia, determined one's fate. Think of the conflicts of our age: Shia versus Sunni, Hindu versus Muslim, Catholic against Protestant, Israeli, Palestinian, North and South Korea, the persecution of Rohingya in Myanmar, the crackdown, what's being called a genocide of ethnic Uyghur Muslims in China. In every case, identity is critical. In every conflict that I have covered in 40 years of journalism, at the core is that lethal question: who are you? Right now, Vladimir Putin is holding a gun to Ukraine's, ipso facto, the rest of our heads. Why? Because of that question: who are you? To Putin, Ukraine is Russia. It is the core of Russian identity. Kiev is the mother of all Russian cities. They are one and the same. He has said it very clearly: Ukraine has no sovereignty apart from Russia. Putin has the whiff of history in his nostrils. The French philosopher Jacques Derrida spoke of people just like Vladimir Putin, those, he said, who have the bread of apocalypse in their mouths. The bread of apocalypse in their mouths. They are the people formed by history, haunted by history, as Derrida would have seen it. History is a ghost returning over and over. Derrida asked, what does it mean to follow a ghost? We are persecuted, he said, by the very chase we are leading. The future comes back in advance, from the past, from the back. Putin is haunted by the fall of the Soviet Union. He has described that moment that ended the Cold War as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Don't think, though, that he yearns for the return of communism. If you don't feel nostalgic for the Soviet Union, he once said, you don't have art. If you want it back, you don't have a brain. What he does seek, though, is to recover what he sees as Russia's lost glory. Putin believes he is the inheritor of the legacy of Catherine the Great. Russia, he says, was humiliated at the end of the Cold War. Encroachment and enlargement of NATO he sees as evidence of that humiliation. Ukraine's drift further west and its aspiration, albeit distant, to join NATO is a bridge too far. Putin has declared himself, if you like, defender of the faith. And indeed faith, Russian Orthodox Christianity, is central to his conception of national identity. Reviving the Russian spirit and settling that question, who are you? Let's talk about Putin because he speaks so powerfully to the global phenomenon of what has been called the return of the strongman. Let me recount a little story that tells us a lot. It is a glimpse into the mind of Vladimir Putin. Let me take you back to an earlier crisis in 2008. Putin is preparing to invade the former Soviet state of Georgia, just like today, to secure 2 breakaway enclaves. Again, with echoes of this crisis, the Western powers were aligned against him. He was warned that any action would bring severe consequences. He was denounced as breaching international law. Putin invaded anyway. As the crisis intensified, he had a phone conference with an anxious Georgian president, Mikhail Saakashvili, who stood then where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stands today. Saakashvili stressed to Putin that the West was lining against him. He pointed out commentary and newspapers telling him to back off. "Do you see these statements condemning you?" Saakashvili said to Putin. Here was Putin's reply, and I apologise for the indelicate language. "Why don't you roll up those papers and stick them in their arse?" Saakashvili is fond of recounting that story with a chuckle, but it underlines how single-minded and ruthless Putin can be. Interviewed by Time magazine in 2014 as Putin first rolled troops into Ukraine, Saakashvili warned that the West failed to understand Vladimir Putin. Western leaders misread him, underestimate him and his resolve. Saakashvili said, "In the struggle between Russia and the West, Putin will keep winning." This isn't to laud Putin. His interest is power and how to hold on to it. As Mikhail Saakashvili told Time magazine, he likes to lie. You can see it on his face. It's not like a poker face. It's, "Okay, I'm lying." Who is Putin? What does he believe? There is a simplistic caricature of the anti-Western authoritarian demagogue intent on war. Like all caricatures, it has elements of truth. He has made war, he is making war now. He is authoritarian and has cracked down internally on everything from LGBTIQ communities to what he considers subversive rock music. He has locked up rivals and, like all demagogues, has cultivated his own cult of personality. But he is much more complex, contradictory and canny than that snapshot. Vladimir Putin was born into the Communist Party. His father was a party member and was part of the feared NKVD, the party's law enforcement arm, which included a secret wing known for political repression, murder and assassinations. Putin's grandfather worked as a chef for both Lenin and Stalin. But as I have said, Vladimir Putin is not a communist ideologue. Putin has been a work in progress. Philosopher Michael Elchaninov has traced Putin's intellectual journey in his book Inside the Mind of Vladimir Putin. He charts how Putin came to power in 2000, disavowing ideology. He was seen by some as potentially a liberal democrat, opening Russia up to Europe. He said then Russia was a European country. Putin, even for a while, kept in his office a bust of Peter the Great, the 17th and 18th century Tsar who turned his country to the West. But Putin has always been many things to many people, a pragmatist and a shapeshifter. Elchaninov says, above all, Vladimir Putin is a realist. He adapts his discourse according to circumstances and refuses to be bound by any ideological shackles. He has refined his worldview over his 2 decades in power. By his 3rd presidential term in 2012, after a stint as Prime Minister, Elchaninov says the Russian leader was about revenge. Revenge against those protesting his return to power and revenge against the West. What does matter to Putin is patriotism, power and identity. Who are you? In this, he is no different from China's President Xi Jinping. Like Vladimir Putin, Xi has the bread of apocalypse in his mouth. Xi Jinping is born of a country burdened by history. He looks to the past, just like Putin, and Xi's catastrophe, forever reminding his people of the 100 years of humiliation, how China has been occupied, exploited, and brutalised by foreign powers. The 100 years of humiliation is burned into the souls of Chinese people. China's return to power is in no small measure a story of revenge and a warning that China will never again be humiliated. To understand Xi Jinping, let me take you to a mystical place called Yellow Earth. In the dusty plateau of Shanxi province in northwest China, alongside the fabled Yellow River, it is considered the cradle of Chinese civilization. It was to here that Xi Jinping was banished as a young man during the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and 1970s. Xi's family was in disgrace. His father, Xi Zhongxun, a revered figure in the years before the revolution, had been purged from the party. Xi Sr. had been one of Mao Zedong's most trusted figures. He was the youngest man appointed to Mao's cabinet, and someone Mao said had been tempered by fire. But now, as Mao grew suspicious of those around him, Xi Zhongxun was banished. One of Xi Jinping's older stepsisters is said to have committed suicide during this time, humiliated and taunted. Xi Jinping was sent to the farms, like so many other children of the elite, to be re-educated in the truth of the party. Xi now calls himself a son of Yellow Earth. In a short autobiography, he describes arriving in Shanxi anxious and confused. He recalls living in lice-infested caves and toiling in the fields all day. It toughened his body, fortified his spirit, and hardened his hands. Xi attended daily struggle sessions, as they were called, and had to denounce purged Chinese revolutionary leaders, including his own father. Yet rather than turn away from the party, Xi Jinping grew ever more devoted. By the time he left Yellow Earth, Xi writes, "My life goals were firm and I was filled with confidence." Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin see themselves as the great men of history, modern emperors, modern tsars. These figures for a time bend the world to their will. They each ask us that deadly question, who are you? At the recent Winter Olympics in Beijing, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin shook hands on a new no-limits pact. I wonder now how that moment will be seen in the years to come. Do we stand on the precipice of a new catastrophe? Are we sliding, or as the great Australian historian Christopher Clark put it when writing of the First World War, sleepwalking to a new global conflict? What was for a time unthinkable is now no longer unimaginable. Russia and China have their differences. Even during the Cold War, these two communist nations were intense rivals. They may yet still clash themselves over territory, but for now, they have formed an alliance of convenience. As the saying goes, my enemy's enemy is my friend. China and Russia share a foe, the United States, and that binds them. The US has named China and Russia as the two greatest threats to American security. Putin and Xi believe the balance of power is at a tipping point. China is poised to eclipse the United States as the world's biggest economy and is already the single biggest engine of economic growth. It is building a military to match its economic might. It has embarked on a new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, the biggest investment and infrastructure project the world has ever seen. It will expand China's reach into Central Asia, to the Middle East and Africa. What was known as the American century may be drawing to a close, and what the American journalist and scholar Fareed Zakaria has called the post-American world may be upon us. Xi Jinping says simply, the West is waning and the East is rising. How did we get to this point? It wasn't supposed to be this way. Let me take you back to 1991. The United States stood unchallenged. The Cold War was over. The Berlin Wall had come down 2 years before. And now the red flag of the Soviet Union had been lowered for the last time in Moscow. Francis Fukuyama, the American political scientist, hubristically pronounced this moment the end of history. This would be the ultimate triumph of liberal democracy and usher in a new era of democracy worldwide. Russia was humbled. China was expected to go the same way. The Chinese Communist Party, it was said, would reform and accept the inevitability of democracy, or it would collapse. So as Russia invades Ukraine, as China eyes off Taiwan, we know for sure history did not end. The US talks a tough game. It rallies its allies. It hits back with sanctions. It moves its troops around the world, but it won't fight. President Joe Biden said as much. He will not put American lives on the line to defend the sovereignty of democratic Ukraine. That is an invitation to Vladimir Putin. Xi Jinping would be wondering if the US will spill blood to defend Taiwan. The last they saw of the US military, it was retreating from Afghanistan, and after 20 years, the Taliban was claiming victory. The question now is, what happened to America? How did the world go from the unipolar moment to the end of the American order? Where to begin? 1991, the US had an opportunity then to bring a humbled Russia in closer to the West. It was an opportunity lost. Do we go to 1998 rather? Bill Clinton, impeached for his tawdry abuse of power. His lies about his sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky demeaned the office of the president and turned the White House into a reality TV program. 2001, Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda launches a terrorist attack on US soil. America responds with war on Afghanistan. We know now how that ends. What about 2003? George W. Bush decides to invade Iraq on the pretense of Saddam Hussein hoarding weapons of mass destruction. The US attacks without UN sanction. It is accused of breaching international law, upending the rules-based global order, the rules that America itself had written. The Iraq invasion damaged American credibility and prestige. It triggered a power vacuum that spilled over in the region, tipping neighbouring countries like Syria into civil war. Terror groups became emboldened, leading to Islamic State eventually declaring a caliphate. 2007, America's corrupt banking system collapses, triggering a global financial crisis that cost Americans their jobs and their houses, while the bankers were deemed too big to fail. This sowed the seeds for the angry backlash of those who felt abandoned by their own country. The line from bailing out Wall Street bankers to Donald Trump's presidency is clear. 2008, the election of Barack Obama, supposedly promising hope and yes, we can. The first black president, the so-called post-racial America had arrived, we had told. And race anger only intensifies. Obama left the world and America weaker. On his watch, North Korea stockpiled its nuclear arsenal. China claimed and militarised the disputed islands of the South China Sea. Putin annexed Crimea. ISIS carved out its caliphate. Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons on his own people in Syria. Iran made a fortune out of its nuclear deal, halting but not abandoning its pursuit of nuclear weapons, and used that windfall to fund terrorism in the Middle East. What about 2016, the Trump presidency? A man who exploited the worst of America, trashed alliances, cozied up to despots. Yet, Trump was a symptom of a system already poisoned. 2021, Joe Biden abandons Afghanistan. The images of troops leaving and helicopters in the air resembled the fall of Saigon. The last 30 years have been a persistent erosion of American power and prestige. It is a nation in search of its soul, of its moral purpose. It has been led by a succession of timid or reckless or vapid or exploitative and opportunist presidents. International politics expert Jonathan Holslag calls them polite cowards. Those leaders, he said, who talk up democracy while ignoring the people in their own countries whom democracy is failing. Each leader has presided over the drift from the American dream. Inequality has grown like a cancer. Research by economists Anne Case and Angus Deaton reveals the wealth of someone in the top 1% of American society is 950 times greater than a member of the bottom 50%. 950 times greater than a member of the bottom 50%. That is not sustainable. Case and Deaton tell of an America of broken families, drug dependency, increasing suicide, declining wages, or no work at all. To these people, they say Washington politics looks more like a racket. But the unravelling of America began decades earlier. The heady days of the Cold War victory obscured deeper cracks in the US. Political scientist Joseph Nye said the United States stopped paying attention to the world and turned their sights inwards. American leaders, he said, became arrogant about our power, arguing that we did not need to heed other nations. We seemed invincible and invulnerable. 1989 was a watershed, but in hindsight, not for the reasons we first thought. Jonathan Holslag, in his book World Politics Since 1989, says the high tide of globalisation appeared to hold opportunities for us all. What did we get? Nationalism and authoritarianism. He says they are on the offence. Resentment is rising and there are disputes everywhere over territory. He says that from crisis to crisis, the Western world has lost more of its power. Holslag says America and the broader West desperately needs civic renewal, but instead is mired in culture wars that chip away at the foundations that made the West strong in the first place. The United States is still the most powerful military in the world, still the biggest economy. The world still looks to America. The US is the bedrock of Australian security. Democracy, however imperfect, has a moral purpose that authoritarianism not only lacks, but fears. Right now, American resolve in the world is crucial, and yet we can see the sunset of the American century on the horizon. It isn't a foreign power that will defeat the US as much as it will defeat itself. Like empires past, it rots from the inside. The likes of Putin and Xi sense their moment. And we are left with the question, where did America go? Presidents from George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump said the US did not need to be the world's policeman. Now Joe Biden tells us America is back. How the poor, suffering people being bombarded in Ukraine must desperately hope that is true. The West is so unsure of itself. The war in Ukraine is a war the West does not know how to fight. It is not just about territory or borders or resources or power. It is existential. It is about identity. Who are you? Vladimir Putin, as I said, has made it clear Ukraine is part of the soul of Russia. Yes, he's made security demands. He wants the West out of what he sees as Russia's sphere of influence. He wants a cast-iron guarantee that Ukraine can never join NATO. But it is the why that is more important than the what here. Why? Because to Putin, there is no Ukraine without Russia. They are one. Putin sees Ukraine as Russian land, essential to Putin's idea of what he calls Ruski Mir, Russian world. It is about Russian language, culture, it is blood and soil. It is mythological. Ruski Mir is holy. To Russian nationalists like Putin, Ukraine belongs to Russia. This is why Putin famously said that the greatest collapse of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why can't the West fight this? Because the West doesn't even understand it. The West is meant to be a place beyond identity. This is everything the West is not. The modern West grew out of Reformation and Enlightenment. It was about liberation. In the West, we change citizenship, we move countries, we swap or abandon religions. Pluralism and multiculturalism, the hallmarks of our success. We celebrate diversity as a strength. But the success of the West poses harder and harder questions on us. Liberal democracy is staggering under the weight of growing inequality, contested rights, and political tribalism. What binds us? We appear ever rootless, not rooted. Not everyone, of course. Roots do matter to some. But liberal democracy can leave us unmoored. It hollows out our communities, it mocks tradition, banishes faith from the public square. Liberalism elevates the individual to the point of alienation. The modern West is less village square than it is city centre. Yes, there are somewheres, as the British writer David Goodhart put it, but inexorably, we seem to be on a journey to anywhere. This is a demographic, economic, and cultural fault line that runs through the liberal, pluralist West, and it is increasingly political. It is a battle over what the West is and who is prepared to defend it. It cuts across religious freedom, LGBTQI rights, race, gender, and class. It divides the rural populations from the urban. And Vladimir Putin sees it as a weakness. He has castigated the West for its culture wars and its corrosive identity politics. Meanwhile, Putin himself plays identity writ large. He plays it hard. When it comes to national identity, when it comes to Russian civilization, Putin shows none of the self-doubt that he sees in the West. Putin is a product of our age. As globalisation has continued apace, there has been a blowback, a return to borders, tradition, religion, race, the return of the tribe, and it has set the world on fire. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Amartya Sen best summed up this with his phrase, solitarist identity. What did he mean? He means that our world turns toxic when we are reduced to one essential thing, our race or our religion or our nation. Then, he says, we fail to see ourselves in each other. This is where identity meets violence. Solitarist identity, Sen says, kills, and it kills with abandon. The West has been dragged into the wars of identity. Think of the last few decades, the ethnic cleansing of Rwanda, the conflict in the Balkans and the breakup of the old Yugoslavia, the persecution of Rohingya in Myanmar, the conflicts around the world. Who you are is certainly the most dangerous question. I need to talk about faith, remembering Graham Wilkes and how important faith is. But where is faith in our world? The 19th century French author Victor Hugo wrote, "For 6,000 years, war has pleased the quarrelling peoples, and God has wasted his time making the stars and the flowers." Was he right? Are we condemned to war? Is this our natural state, and the stars and the flowers and the dreams of peace are just the folly of God? I've asked myself this question over and over. It is a question that has haunted me for as long as I can remember. I have given my life over to this question. I am one of those who can say that they are blessed by the presence of God. I have never felt the absence of a loving spirit guarding my life and guiding my life. That same spirit I've seen in the struggles of ordinary people staring down adversity and suffering in all the countries that I've reported from. And yet I know how easily we can bend to tyranny. More than that, we are drawn to tyranny. Some part of ourselves craves the certainty that tyranny brings. In the battle for our souls, I can't help but wonder if the darkness will forever devour the light. This question has troubled the minds of scientists and philosophers and poets through the ages. Love and war are the eternal themes of art and politics and faith. The earliest surviving work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh, written 2,000 years before Christ, is a meditation on love and war. Gilgamesh embarks on a great journey to discover the secret of eternal life, but he learns that he will never find this life he searches for. For when the gods created man, they let death be his share, and life withheld in their own hands. The history of humanity tells us that much. History, the philosopher Hegel wrote, is a slaughter bench at which the happiness of peoples, the wisdom of states, and the virtue of individuals have been victimised. Where is God in all this carnage? Victor Hugo was wrong. God is not always in the flowers and the stars. For much of the past 2,000 years, God has been at the head of armies. From Constantine's spiritual awakening in battle outside Rome in the year 312 AD to the end of Europe's bloody 30 Years' War in 1648, war shaped the birth of the modern world. The historian Arnaud Blin writes that the many wars that have rocked and shaped Europe, the Mediterranean and the Greater Middle East, were in one way or another driven or influenced by religion. Does Australia have a God problem? The recent attempts to pass religious discrimination legislation may suggest so. The political debate of recent weeks tested the limits of our tolerance, freedom, respect, and rights. None of it helped by a heavy dose of political opportunism and partisanship across the aisles of Parliament. The political right sensed an opportunity to expose the left as being weak on faith. The left, strategically, if not cynically, courts the progressive politics of identity that at its more extreme is dismissive, indeed hostile, to religion. The socially progressive culture of much of the media means that the deeply held beliefs of conservative people of faith on abortion, LGBTIQ issues, euthanasia, etc., are framed as discrimination and tolerance rather than conviction. Religion is presented as a question of belief, as if these are just intellectual positions, rather than the more intimate and profound experience of faith. To religious people, faith is not a reasoned belief, it is an essence of being, a distinction that escapes secularists. Conservatives, meanwhile, seem more eager to plant the flag of their faith in the defence of intolerance or exclusion, rather than the teachings of love, forgiveness, grace, and humility. The bold assertion of religious freedom has been undermined by the moral failings of the Church itself, especially on issues of sexual abuse. The politics of faith and secularism are divisive and seemingly implacable. But Australia is not alone when it comes to questions of God. Religion everywhere raises that question: who are you? Throughout the world, faith is a political fault line. Indeed, for liberal democracies, it is an existential challenge. It raises questions of who belongs, where does the public and private begin and end, what is the future of pluralism, can democracy still effectively govern over diversity? From India's hijab ban in some schools, to France's public prohibition of the full veil, to Sweden's ban on minarets on mosques, the role of faith in the public square is an incendiary one. Political leaders around the world are seizing on religion as a fundamental marker of national identity. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi pursues a virulent Hindu nationalism that is eroding that country's democracy. The Chinese Communist Party outlaws all Christian churches not authorised, monitored and approved by the state. During my years reporting in China, I met people who risked everything and indeed not only faced arrest but were arrested for the right to worship. China has called Islam a mental illness to justify what's being called a genocide against Uyghurs. Political populists like Hungary's Viktor Orban, who was boasted of his illiberal democracy, was once an atheist, but now styles himself as the defender of Christianity. He says Western Europe has given up on Christianity. Instead, he says it has chosen a godless cosmos, rainbow families, migration, and open societies. French scholar Olivier Roy has questioned if Europe is in fact still Christian. He says secularisation has given way to large-scale de-Christianisation. There is now, he says, a serious crisis surrounding European identity and the place of religion in the public square. Journalist Rachel Donadio, in a recent Atlantic magazine article, asked, "Why is France so afraid of God?" In France, she says, the idea of laïcité defines the most ferociously contested battle lines in contemporary France. Laïcité, she says, does not establish the freedom of religion, but sometimes the freedom from religion. She writes, the term has come to express a uniquely French insistence that religion, along with religious symbols and dress, should be absent from the public square. Rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's has been a defining struggle for liberal democracy. In his landmark book, A Secular Age, the philosopher Charles Taylor posed this fundamental question. Why, he asks, was it virtually impossible not to believe in God in, say, 1500 in our Western society, while in 2000 many of us find this not only easy but even inescapable? For many people, he says, the answer is simple. Modern civilization cannot but bring about a death of God. Modernity itself is built upon the elevation of the individual, the rupture of tradition, and the goal of human flourishing. As Taylor writes, secularism means that for the first time in history, a purely self-sufficient humanism came to be a widely available option. This is a humanism, he says, accepting no final goals beyond human flourishing. Of no previous society was this true. The rise of secularism, the separation of God from the public square, is seeded in the 18th century Enlightenment. Giant figures like the philosopher David Hume questioned the rationality of religion and wondered how the existence of God was consistent with human suffering. Hume is often hailed as a philosophical hero to atheists. Liberal democracies that emerged out of the Enlightenment embraced the doctrine of separation of church and state. But the globalised, pluralist, multicultural 21st century asks more difficult questions than the 18th century philosophy struggles can answer. Charles Taylor has called this a disenchanted age. We can rationalise the world, he says, and expel the mystery from it. Political utopia has sought to fill the void. The political philosopher Judith Sklar traced the decline of political faith, identifying what she called the alienated soul, who has lost all faith in the belief of the past, having been disillusioned by scepticism, but is unable to find a new home for its spiritual longings in the present or the future. Liberalism, Sklar said, had become unsure of its moral basis. It is a society built on rationalisation and bureaucratisation. Inevitably, there is an emptiness, filled today by identity-based politics, seeking belonging around shared suffering and injustice, or people of faith for whom divine scripture cannot be contracted away. Both identity and faith are a response to a world stripped of meaning. They each seek comfort and assurance in an age of moral and political complexity. Indeed, they share things in common. Identity politics groups can be as doctrinaire and rigid as some conservative people of faith. To philosopher and theologian John Milbank, we have traded what he called hierocratic rule, authority of the church, for conciliatory contractual rule. Secularity itself, he says, relies on an ontology of violence. It assumes the priority of force and tells us how this force is best managed and confined by counterforce. So we have what we see in the world, a contest of power. At its more benign, it is a peaceful democratic contest of ideas. But at its worst, it gives rise to actual violence and extremism. John Milbank argues that Christianity itself can reconcile virtue with difference in a way that is living together in agreement rather than just mutual toleration. It is, he says, a justice of real peace that is more than just suspended warfare. This is where we find ourselves today, and this is what the recent debate over religious freedom showed us, that this divide between the secular and the religious has become almost intractable. That two sides don't seek to find themselves in each other, but seek to divide each other, and that we speak more harshly to each other, and that we troll each other on social media, and that the media itself feeds into this division, feeds into this question of who are you, not seeking to find where we meet each other, but only seeking to exploit where we divide from each other. This is where we are in our world today with Vladimir Putin massing his troops on the border of Ukraine. We face a world where that question, who are you, is the one that sets the world ablaze. Let me turn to Australia and Australia's place in this world and our fundamental question as we wrestle with these issues of identity, as we wrestle with these questions of faith and secularity. We arrive at what Hannah Arendt, the philosopher, called not just rights, but the right to have rights. Whose rights? Who determines that? The right to have rights pivots on that fundamental question: who are you? In Australia, the question of rights cannot escape the struggle for recognition and justice for Indigenous people. It is a struggle that has lasted 2 centuries, and still we are not there. The Uluru Statement from the Heart offered a new compact with all Australians that would reset our national identity and enhance our political legitimacy. But its poetic vision and pragmatism proved its death knell. Trying to reconcile 2 historically divergent, if not hostile, ideas, Indigenous sovereignty on the one hand and the sovereignty of the Commonwealth on the other, asked the nation to embark on a project of rehabilitation: voice, treaty and truth. The proposed constitutionally enshrined voice was rejected, and treaty remains a dream, and the Australian people often appear indifferent to questions of our own history. The Uluru Statement offered the nation the building blocks for a new nation. But Australia struggles with this idea of rights versus equality. The great lie of the Turnbull government was that the Uluru Statement and a voice in the Constitution would be a third chamber of Parliament, prevailed over the Indigenous truth because to so many ears it sounded so right. The appearance of Indigenous people enjoying rights not shared by other Australians was cast as offensive to Liberal principles. The Uluru Statement was junked, and Australians, hitherto generous to the idea of constitutional recognition, barely raised a whimper. What should have been a high watermark of Australian liberalism instead became a victim of Australian liberalism. So it poses this question: can our liberal democracy meet the demands of First Nations people? For some, the answer is no, not if it means privileging the rights of one group over the individual. Some Indigenous people themselves reject liberalism as an inherently and irredeemably racist colonial project. So we have the divide. Who are you? How do we untie this Gordian knot? The political philosopher Duncan Iversons believes we can. The Uluru Statement, he said, presented an opportunity for a refounding of Australia. He says, if Indigenous people are to accept the legitimacy of the state, then the most important shift liberalism can make is to embrace a more historically informed approach to justice. Australians may be interested in learning more about our past, but that stops just short of justice for the past. Australians generally don't think history is a debt to be repaid. Australia is a place that looks forward, not back. Symbolic acts of reconciliation, the Stolen Generations apology, are okay, but distinct rights for First Nations people, not so much. Indigenous rights challenge the Australian identity as egalitarian, multicultural and tolerant. The fair go does not mean a better go. The Indigenous constitutional voice was miscast by mischievous politicians as To change Australia, Australians must want to change themselves. Who are you? That question, that deadly dangerous question, is reshaping our world. Vladimir Putin can answer that question. Xi Jinping can answer that question. An Islamist militant and a right-wing Christian white supremacist can answer that question, and we know how lethal that answer can be. The war in Ukraine does not end there. Identity wars don't end. The warring parties may retreat, but hate festers and the war begins again. We in the West struggle to answer that question. Who are you? We have our own identity wars. We define ourselves not by who we are, but more often who we are not. Our strength is in our freedom, but our freedom can leave us untethered. We have a view from nowhere that can look like the view of nothing. It is eroding democracy. Democracy is in retreat. Freedom House, which measures the health of democracy worldwide, now counts 15 straight years of declining democracy. Authoritarianism is on the march. Can I suggest that in Australia, at least, we may have another chance? Australia is one of the most resilient, one of the most robust democracies on the planet. And the Uluru Statement offers us a chance to strengthen that democracy where it is most broken. We can make our democracy stronger when democracy elsewhere is failing. As someone who was part of the consultation process leading up to the Uluru Statement, I was inspired especially by the role of indigenous women. Our matriarchs hold us together. I think of people like Megan Davis and Pat Anderson on the Referendum Council, Trojans who with care and love kept hope alive for us all, as our women do in our communities all around the country. The Uluru Statement has been offered as a gift to the nation, an invitation to walk together for a better future. How remarkable that a people so written out of the Constitution can believe, in spite of it all, that our nation's founding document can work for us all. There is our glimmer of hope in a very dark world. Our chance to ask, not who are you, but who are we? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have time for some questions, don't we, Graham?
Yes, we do have some time for questions, and we're going to set, and they're done, microphone just in the middle. Now, one of the few things that I get to do tonight
Is ask the first one.
No, well, yes. Two things I get to do tonight, yes, is to just point out that we don't have a lot of rules about our Q&A session tonight, or is that trademarked? Am I allowed to?
Oh, that's fine.
No, that's fine, good.
Q&A, you can use that.
I can use that term, good. But
We didn't invent it, we just ruined it.
yeah. But can I just ask a couple of things? There were going to be two microphones, but I think that there is only the one. And we'll do this orderly. But please, no speeches, no debate, just short to the point questions would be really good. How will it work? Simply come up to the microphone, form a bit of a line, and and we'll work our way forwards. Simple as that. And I get to ask the first one while someone is coming up. You mentioned that we sometimes don't get it. We don't understand. And I'd like you to comment on a conversation or an exchange that I believe happened. I don't think it's apocryphal or urban myth. One of our Prime Ministers was talking about how much money our government spends on the Aboriginal issue and First Nations people, and listed off all the money we spend. And one of the local communities stood up and said, but it's not about money.
That is a really good observation, because when we talk about rights, I always make the point, we don't live in a world of rights. We live in a market of rights. Your ability to have your rights recognised fundamentally is defined by your relationship to the market. That's the truth. You know, privilege is power and privilege is rights. To access your rights, you have to bring political power to bear. How do we, as the most impoverished and imprisoned people in the country, 3% of the population, possibly bring our power to bear? But what we do have is a moral power and an unyielding love of this country, in spite of everything. And that's why that comment was so apt. You can't put a dollar on dignity. When I was a kid, we were dirt poor. Aboriginal family, moving from town to town. I barely went to school till I was 14 years old. Dad worked in sawmills, lost the tips of 3 of his fingers, broke almost every bone in his body. My mother cleaned houses and cleaned cars, and we lived in sawmill shacks and caravans and tents. We didn't have money, but we had dignity. And we had culture, and we had family, and we had kinship, and we had love, and we had faith. And you can't put a price on that. Now, Australia can and must deal with the socio-economic challenges the First Nations people. It is not good enough that we die 10 years younger, that we clog up our prisons and our juvenile detention centres, and that we live in overcrowded homes and have the worst health care and housing and the worst educational and economic and employment statistics of any group in the country. But that's economic. But until we deal with the fundamental question that lies at the heart of this country is, how can this country believe in itself? How can we be we until we have made peace with the way the country was founded, the people who have suffered, and recognise that our democracy has roots that goes much longer, much deeper than 200 years. That is a challenge you can't put a price on. Thank you.
Stan, thank you so much for your speech tonight, and the timely nature of where we are in the international community. And of course you are a polymath for us in geopolitical terminology, with your experience and your ability to cut to the chase and tell us what are the problems. Can I just make 3 points? First of all, we do have a God problem, but we also have the opportunity for humanism and existentialism to be taught in our schools as a modern way of finding our moral and value compass without God. But certainly a sort of, Barnaby Joyce, I think he just told the whole story about the statement from the heart. We must have a treaty. Yeah. I just feel that's...
Okay. No, that's a really good observation. It's interesting you say when we talk about faith and we talk about secularism as if they're two opposed things, in fact, secularism is a faith. Maybe a faith in reason, maybe a faith in the markets. It is still a faith. Atheism is a faith. Some of the more devout and incredibly doctrinaire people I've met, who are atheists. I think it was the poet William Blake who once said, people will always need and always want a religion. We've just traded that for freedom or history or money or individualism. And it's that contest. And I've studied philosophy. That was what I did at university. I know that science can tell us why a sunrise and a sunset looks the way it does. It can't tell me why I feel the way I do when I look at a sunrise or a sunset. There is a space for the magical and the mystical. And we have taken the enchantment of the world and turned it to disenchantment. And we fill that disenchantment with a quest for who are you rather than who are we, in all humility, knowing that there are far bigger things than us.
This is about telling your life stories. Apparently there are 150 Indigenous people in the Unley area, our area. Most of us have trouble writing down our life story, and we appreciate somebody comes along and helps us do it. Now, that leads me to the idea there might be Indigenous people in Unley who would like to have their life story documented. And the problem is how to make the offer and how to help.
To tell those stories.
For them to document their own life stories.
It's interesting you say that because the stories of our people are often so obvious that they're never seen. And they're written on the land, and they're part of this country. And our people are such incredible storytellers. And our story is the story of Australia. So, of course, to tell the stories of individuals is important. And to be able to make that offer and to connect with individuals is important. But there is also another story that we tell all the time by our presence here, our mere presence in the country, that speaks to something even more profound than just the individual lives or whoever that may be. But it's to be able to make that offer is important, to find ways, and we do that with respect, and we do that with understanding each other and seeing that our stories are also your stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stan, thank you for reinforcing the concept that the Uluru Statement is an opportunity for Australia. I'm concerned by your comments that the ability to get it implemented may be fading. How do we gather the political support for the acceptance and implementation of the Uluru Statement?
We have to make it count, and politicians respond to where the power is. Politicians go where the votes are. You can't do anything unless you're in office, and you can't get elected unless you're speaking about the things that the people tell you that are important to them. Now, I know that Australians fill out their, when they're asked in opinion poll surveys, do you support the Uluru Statement? Do you support recognition for Aboriginal people? And they say yes. It's like saying, do you support the sunrise? It's a motherhood statement, But when you break it down, what are you prepared to give up for that? What are you prepared to vote on that? It's a different story. Now, the previous government under Malcolm Turnbull rejected the Uluru Statement out of hand, barely gave it a hearing, and we shrugged. Oh, okay. And no one took to the street. No one. no one really raised a whimper. No one changed their vote on it. So until it matters to everybody, really matters to everybody, it's not going to matter to politicians. Now, there's a process, and we have endless process. There's a process underway at the moment to try to draft different models, and we have another model being put to people now, and that's going to be a process that extends into the next parliament. And potentially we may get some legislation, and there may be a referendum, and maybe down the line. But ultimately, if people don't make it count, then politicians won't listen to that. And ultimately, when it comes to a vote, if it does come to a referendum, are we really going to vote on that? I mean, remember the Republic referendum? The opinion poll said, most people said they're in favour of Australia becoming a republic. Not really. Not when it came down to it. Unless you get a political bipartisanship, unless there is a groundswell of support, then we're not going to see a shift. And when it comes to Indigenous people in Australia, it's so difficult to mobilise the rest of the public because it's something out there, it's something they don't see, it's something unfamiliar, it happens somewhere else. We're like a foreign country. And it comes back to that question again, that fundamental question. We don't do it as violently as other parts of the world do. Who are you? We don't put a gun to each other's heads. Thankfully, we don't blow up mosques and synagogues and churches, and we don't do it. We do it better in Australia. But we still ask the same question. Who are you? And for Aboriginal people, that answer has been far too often meant that you are excluded, segregated, ignored, not recognised, impoverished, imprisoned, children taken. That's what that question has meant to us. And we still don't get to ask who are we in Australia, because the missing ingredient is that ability to connect all of us to something so much more profound and deeper. But until it matters, and not just matters in polite company, or not just matters in an opinion poll, until it really matters, until some people are going to go to vote on it, it's not going to change politically. There just isn't the groundswell of support to shift power in the way that it needs to. But it's a good question, thank you.
For the first time in my lifetime, I can visualise Australia being colonised again. And I don't think that Australians would sort of live well under the authoritarian Chinese style of leadership. Do you think that China's long game includes Australia?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. I lived there for 11 years, and reported everywhere from there. And funnily enough, and I found this when I was in North Korea as well. And most people want to live lives untouched by politics. In China, people want to send their kids to school and go to work and watch the football and have a beer and, the things that people want to do that we want to do. I remember being in North Korea once, and just get to your point in a minute about Australia, but I remember being in North Korea once, and after a couple of days, I found myself getting up, having breakfast, going for a run around the lake, doing my work, and it just felt so unbelievably normal. That authoritarianism, when you live within it, and you make your life in it, and you make your peace with it, can be comforting and comfortable in a strange way. So that earlier question, what will it be like living under that sort of regime? Well, people do that all the time, and you can convince yourself of something, even when it's not true. Now, whether China has designs on Australia, the way that Xi Jinping sees the world is not the sort of occupation of the world of previous empires, I don't think. It's not a world of alliances even that we've seen under the United States. It's transactional. Hence things like the Belt and Road Initiative. You build infrastructure, investment, you create relationships of debt and indebtedness. It's the old imperial system of coming and kowtowing to the emperor. And when you're far from the emperor, you can get on with doing your life as you wish, as long as that does not interfere with what the emperor wishes or what China seeks to achieve. That's the sort of global leadership that he seeks. He wants recognition and respect for China's position in the world, and there is some legitimacy to that, a lot of legitimacy to that. China is a big power. The post-World War II order, the rules were written by Western powers. The West is 20% of the world's population and rules the rest of the world. The IMF, the World Bank, the big institutions are run by Americans and Europeans. Why wouldn't China say, sorry, we're the biggest engine of economic growth. By the end of the decade, we'll be the biggest economy in the world. We want a share of that power. That's not equitable. That's not fair. And great powers do what they want. You know, the old lesson from Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War. Great powers do what they wish and the weak suffer what they must. And China's a great power. America's a great power that has done what it wished in the world. The difference is, and this is where I think we get down to the challenge of our age. The difference is that, as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And democracy, which has been imposed on the world through colonisation and empire and at the barrel of a gun, that has been imperfect and unfair. A nation like the United States, born in the genocide of Native American people and the backs of slaves, it still does not live up to the great creed of America, of equality for all. It holds within it a promise, and democracy has the ability to rehabilitate, to rejuvenate, and we have the right to bring our voices to that. You know, to speak, to petition, to protest, to vote. In the face of all of the power and privilege that we know exists, we have the capacity to bring something to that. And if you get the right numbers, you can bring about that change. You know, I say to people, there are no Uyghur Lives Matter movements in China. We can bring our voices to it, even as 3% of the population, we can bring our voices to that. That's what democracy has. I think at the moment, we are at a stage in the West where we truly don't know what to believe, whether we are prepared to defend it, constantly self-laceratingly critical of ourselves, at war with ourselves over so many things, weakening the bonds between us at a time when the stakes could not be higher. And there is certainty in authoritarian regimes. That's the nature of authoritarianism. It is certain of itself. And we are free, and freedom means that inherently you are weak in the strongest parts. And so we struggle with these things right now. Does China seek to overtake Australia? Will America fall? I don't think the West or America or a rules-based democratic order falls because it meets a power like China or the rise of authoritarianism. It falls because it doesn't believe in what it is and is not prepared to rehabilitate itself and has lost sight of justice and equality and fairness and decency. And we've seen far too much of that. So while we focus on what will happen, will China go to war? Will China overrun us? Will we be colonised by China? We stop asking ourselves, where is the strength that we have to resist that? And how do we make sure that we have the strength to resist that? That's where we're failing right now.
Thank you, Stan, for your very thought-provoking presentation. In your book, With the Falling of the Dusk, towards the very end, you have this very hopeful sentence, and I want to read it to you and then ask you a question. You say,
I've probably forgotten it. But,
to survive, we need to look for little moments of joy, those moments when, if you like, the light of God shines. We take those moments where we find them close. Sometimes this is all that gets us through. Where for you are the moments of joy that get you through?
Yeah, well, definitely in my family. In little things, you know, really in my family, like all of my family, this beautiful family that I come from, we're Aboriginal family, and we've got people who are part of our family from all different backgrounds who are still part of an Aboriginal family, you know. That's just an unbelievable enduring strength and joy for me. I mean, I look at my parents, and my parents are into their 80s now, and that alone is a remarkable achievement for Aboriginal people who've had to live the way they've had to live. And I see them now, and there's no battles left to fight, and they know that, you know, the days are drawing nearer, the end is drawing nearer, and the love and tenderness and kindness they have between each other is just unbelievable. And I'm just inspired by that, and I've been inspired by that all around the world. I have seen people in the worst of circumstances find this incredible capacity to go on. And I was going to say the human capacity to go on, the will, but it's more than that. There is something transcendent about us as human beings. There is something, I believe, God-given about us as human beings. But however people want to express that, there is something, a sense of wonder and awe and transcendence and beauty and joy and sadness, that depth of feeling, the ability to empathise, and yes, the ability to hate and tear each other limb from limb. It comes from the same place. We are remarkable, and we live in this tiny planet, and we crowded in with each other and finding ways of understanding and living alongside of each other. And we speak different languages, and we worship different faiths, and we have different cultures, and we look different, and yet there is something ineffably human and, I believe, God-given about us. So that's what I look for. You know, that's what is the thing that gets me through every day. I find it in music, I find it in a sunrise, I find it in diving into the ocean, I find it in holding my wife's hand, I find it in having dinner with my sons, I find it in, you know, my daughter's beauty and her intelligence, I find it in the love of my parents. It's just all around us all the time. And books and words, and I read and I think, and I just try to soak up all of that and know that there is no easy way out. And we look at the tanks rolling in Ukraine, and we think of the conflicts around the world, and we know the people suffering in our world today, and we know that after that there will be another sunrise and another sunset, and we have to find another way to go on, and that is in us. That's what I look for.
And presumably stand some joy and enjoyment out of getting the guitar out.
Oh, yes. I was telling Graham about that. I love playing guitar. You know, my dad and my uncles and my cousins all played guitar, and I started when I was young, and, you know, it's one thing I can do to put aside everything else, just sit there and play guitar and drift off, and just, you know, hours can go by. But yeah, I love that.
And we'll try and honour our last three questioners.
Great.
Simple as that.
Okay.
Yeah, good questions.
Great questions.
I'll be very brief, Stan.
Yeah.
But firstly, thank you for your oratory and the potency of your personhood and the majesty of your spirit.
Oh, thank you. Beautiful. Thank you.
I want to ask whether you're aware of what the studies of quantum consciousness has got to say about the connection between the supernatural and the natural. It ain't there. the divinity is with us. What you've described as your experience on your own patch leads to collaboration rather than confrontation and all the rest.
Yes, well...
Do you know about it? We could talk about
yes,
it, or
yes.
shut up.
Yes, yeah. Well, you know, and when you say what's within us, you know, and I've always remembered, you know, the things that stick with me from when I was at Sunday school, you know, you get those first lessons and you start thinking about these things and that, you know, where is God? God is in heaven. Where is heaven? The kingdom of heaven is within you. It's you know, and you start to see these things, you know. And I remember once, you know, because like everybody, you know, it's an unfolding, unending thing when you try to understand the mysteries of the world and the depth of faith and theology and science and then the ego of the individual and rationality, you know. And a lot of the time I find, that's why I say to people, you know, in the media, when we talk about belief, we're not really getting to the essence of it, because faith is not just belief. And my beliefs clash a lot with my faith. And then I have to go back and question all of those things again. I remember once I was sitting in Mum and Dad's house, I was going to bed, and on the wall, Mum and Dad had got the little plaque, you know, and it says, you know, I'm the way, the life and the truth, and no one can enter the kingdom of heaven but through me. And I went there, you know, one of the things I've always struggled with God and Christianity is the assumption that is the only way. And it's essential too, right? I mean, there is something different about Christianity in that it is the revelation cracked open. It is made human, and that is very different to other faiths. The divine becomes human. And I've always wrestled with that, because I know people of immense faith, of so many other faiths who are incredibly more deserving than me. And I remember looking at that one night, and suddenly there was just an epiphany. You know, I suddenly went, I am. There is no way but through me. And then I went, I am, through me. Where is God? God is in you. Where is He's in heaven? Where is the kingdom of heaven? The kingdom of heaven is within you. It's not out there. And that could be a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Jewish person. And the way to find that transcendence is within you, and a connection to something bigger than you. I had this really incredible experience in the last year. And my wife is a Buddhist. And we go to Buddhist meditation with her. I go with her every week, and it's a great experience. Wonderful teacher, and the meditation is so, to practice that, sit there and have that time in stillness and quiet, and you know, where you can be still and know that I am God. You know, you can do that, and I had this incredibly profound experience, because in your normal life you rush along and you do this and you do that, and you have a nominal faith in things, and away you go, and everything gets pushed out. In going there with her and just having that moment of solitude and reflection and meditation, which is prayer, that's what meditation is, it's prayer. And I suddenly felt, which is quite understandable given the way I grew up, and I grew up in Aboriginal churches, and my uncles were pastors, and it wasn't Buddha, as profound and loving as the messages of Buddha are. It was Jesus that I was experiencing in the meditation. And it was like a reawakening, or a profound reconnection to the depth of that I pushed out with everything else that fills my head. And it was a really humbling thing too, because it showed me that while I am immersed in philosophy and reading philosophers endlessly, philosophy can only take me so far. Only take me so far. And I've got to leave room for that other stuff. So thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant, for speaking tonight. I've learnt a lot. My question for you is, where do you see the future of my generation, and what can we do as young people to create a we as Australia?
Well, you're here tonight, and that's an incredible thing in itself. To be here and to give up your time and to come and listen, it makes me feel incredible, you know, to know that you would do that. You take the time to come and think, and you obviously think about the world and your place in the world. And this is, you know, I have boys, you know, my kids are in their 20s, and you know, and I see them and their lives and their friends, and there is an incredible sense of hope. And one of the great things that we've created in our society is the incredible diversity we have amongst ourselves, and the friendships that are made across all of these different racial and cultural and religious lines that in other parts of the world are so rigidly enforced. And here we just beautifully blend those things. And I think to your generation, the challenge is going to be living with the gift of diversity and still not hardening that into difference. That's going to be your challenge. You know, you're going to face enormous geopolitical challenges. The world will change immeasurably, and it won't look, when you get to my age, it won't look the way it does now. When I was your age, the world looked entirely different. If I got a map of Europe, it looked different. Countries have disappeared. And that will happen in your time. And there'll be conflict, and there'll be economic strife. There'll be incredible, wonderful things that I've seen in my life. People landing on the moon, incredible works of art and films and music and great, you know, there'll be beautiful things and there'll be terrifying things. But the real challenge of your generation in this Western world that we live in, which is rare, this is a human experiment that has never been tried. Nowhere in the history of humanity have we lived together with so much difference. That's a rare experiment, and we're straining. We are really struggling with it. And the challenge of your generation is to take that beautiful difference, beautiful diversity, and not harden it into difference. That's going to be the thing that will define your generation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So many thank yous. I'm very short, I'll go down here. My partner's the tall fella. My question is really whether you can foretell the future, and it seems like you can do so pretty well. Because here we have the young.
Nostradamus, I am not.
I'm the old. And like your parents know that my turn is coming soon. I came to this country in 1974 in the Whitlam era because I thought maybe one country in the world would get it right for their First Nations people. And I wanted to be part of it. So I came here for that purpose. I quickly got disillusioned and have stayed both involved and with a heart. And like you, I feel the thing with the Uluru Statement from the heart was just tragic. I guess my question is, because you're in such a wonderful position of moving around in the media and in other countries, whether you get a sense of the optimism that I think is building, it's got to build. We've got to do it. We've got to keep going. We've got to get it right. And the First Nations people here have got so much to contribute, and we need to heal. This, I think you're so right. This country has got the opportunity of the world to do it right.
Yeah, thank you. It's Australia is you know, I've had this struggle with Australia all my life because you know, you're born into as an Aboriginal person, and navigating this country and its history and finding yourself within it is an ongoing struggle. Really is, you know. And I lived outside of Australia for almost 20 years in different parts of the world, and in a lot of ways it was an incredible liberation. It was a relief that I could go overseas and I didn't have to be the Aboriginal person. Not that I didn't feel proud being an Aboriginal person, I didn't have to be that. I didn't have to carry that. I didn't have to answer all those questions, the weight of that. But it doesn't go away. And, and I felt the lure of the place so much, the place itself. And flying back into Australia, and you'd feel the earth sort of pulling you down into it, and you can feel it's a unique place. But it's a sad place too. And anyone who spent time out of the cities, and you go to the country and you spend time at night under the stars or by the river or something, and you can feel a murmur, like a sadness. Because what was here for tens of thousands of years was suddenly not. And imagine the memories, the living things, the trees and the animals, and the living memories, what is passed on through those living things of sounds. Imagine a country that heard voices and a language for tens of thousands of years, and those animals would have grown accustomed to those sounds and that language, and then gone. And you can feel that out in the country. You can feel that sense of loss. And it's a sad sense. But the place itself is what connects all of us. My father has devoted his life to saving our language, Wiradjuri language of New South Wales. And he wrote the first, with the help of a great linguist, they wrote the first dictionary together of our language. They set up language centres. Charles Sturt University has a postgraduate studies program in Wiradjuri language, the only one of its kind in Australia. And my father said to me one day, language doesn't tell you who you are, it tells you where you are. That is such a fundamentally different philosophical way of being. Not who, where. We ask, who are you, all the time. And in Australia, it should be, where are you? Because we're here. And this place speaks to us. And this is our home. All of us in this room, it's our home. And that's how we find each other. That's the optimism. Where, not who. And we have a lovely phrase in Wiradjuri language. It's Yinjamara Winangana. And Yinjamara Winangana is a philosophical idea. It says to live with respect. Yinjamara is respect. To live with respect, Winangana, in a world worth living in. Not just to live with respect, but make the world worthy of that respect. And we've got a chance, I hope, to do that in Australia in ways that I don't think too many other places do. Thank you.
Stan, thank you for your wise and insightful and generous answers. We'll take a seat because Margaret Calder is going to offer a formal thanks.
Stan, this has been a wonderful night, and I'm sure everyone here is so pleased and will sincerely thank you for coming. We do understand that there was pressures upon you to remain, giving the media their words, your words to the media about the Ukraine situation. And we understand how difficult that is. What a tragedy for those people. But you have brought that to us here tonight, and we will take your words, all of your words, with us. Such a wide range of topics that you've covered. It's challenging, it's unbelievable that you can bring all that together. But I'm sure there's so much of it that we'll take away. And if we only take those last few things about connecting with others, which were also the ones at the start. Looking for the things that connect us, looking for ways that we can connect with other people of all faiths, of all religions, of all the peoples of the world who comes to Australia. The refugee people, we haven't mentioned them tonight. Where is Australia going with our refugee people who are here already seeking asylum? We have looked at, and we will continue to look at, the Uluru Statement. The Effective Living Centre has seen this as a challenge for us to try and work in the way that you have said, to understand the statement, to keep it in mind, and to encourage others to take that forward so that our First Peoples can have the rights that belong to them. Rights and respect and responsibility. These are part of our Effective Living Centre, and we will continue. And we would like to thank you most sincerely for coming tonight to sharing your wonderful wisdom with us.
Hear, hear. It just remains for me now to close this part of our proceedings. Thank you everyone for your attendance tonight, for being here, for wonderful questions. Can only say thank you. To Concordia College for the use of this fantastic auditorium. To the tech crew up the back, thank you very much. To all the Christchurch people and ELC helpers who've made it happen, who've been down here during the week, worked out how we can bring all of this together, thank you to you. Might I just finish by saying, have a look at our website, please. You don't need any more adverts from me about Christchurch and the ELC. In this age we live in, check it out on the web. To wrap up, I did a quick race around the house. My problem is I've got a book everywhere that I sit and everywhere that I rest my head, but I found a few. Stan Grant on identity. Stan Grant talking to my country. This one's a good one. Stan Grant Australia Day. Stan's going to be out in the foyer. There are books for sale. Stan, you've probably got a pen and might even sign. So thank you very much, and we'll be here for another half an hour or so. That will be a great time. Safe travel. Good night.